your time at Facebook. One of the projects that you did work on outside of just coding is actually developing the interview processes for engineers at Facebook. This is something that involves standardizing something at a large scale, defining what people are doing in each step in the process, and trying to remove inconsistency as much as possible. Curious what your goals were for this project as you approached it, and what were some of the challenges that you faced as you worked on improving this?
I think I learned really on in my career that I was very passionate about the people that I worked with, and made a couple of mistakes early on in my career in terms of like the people that were hired, and got to see firsthand some of the difficulties that happen after that decision is made. So it's something I spent a lot of time in my career on, sort of like on the side, both at the startup, but Amazon and Facebook. And Facebook felt like a place where I could have a big impact. There are three main challenges that I ended up sort of like tackling. The first was creating a shared understanding of what criteria would be used to evaluate candidates. The second is agreeing on what are good mechanisms in order to perform the evaluation. And by this, I mean, it could be anything from the process and the logistics to the questions that are asked. Like, what are the effective questions in order for us to evaluate our now existing shared understanding of the criteria? And then the third is probably the most time consuming. Certainly as time goes on, it's the most time consuming. And that is educating people, reinforcing the education, right? You don't just like teach them like, hey, this is our shared understanding. This is how we will evaluate people. But you have to continuously reinforce the education. And you also need to take corrective action when things are not going well. So those are the three big challenges, I think, and I don't think these are unique to Facebook. I think they exist in any company, any organization that wants to hire people. For a small startup, it's not such a huge problem, right? A lot of the core difficulties crop up when you're doing things at scale, and so these challenges, I think, are maybe not unique, but are probably more commonly found in bigger companies. So what were my goals? You'd asked about goals. I think my primary goal at the end of the day was to up-level the average skill of all of the interviewers. So people who had come to the company, who had had a lot of experience, and who had dedicated real time to improving their skill in evaluating candidates, these people exist, right? They're phenomenal. They exist in every company, and they might switch companies. And so someone might come in and they're superstars in terms of interviewing, and they do a phenomenal job, right? I wasn't looking to like make them even better or do anything with them, leverage them more, nothing like that. Really, what I wanted to do was take the average skill, which the baseline skill can be very different than the superstars, and help all of them get better. So that was my goal.
How do people improve at the interviewing process, since usually there aren't a lot of other people in the room with you other than the interviewer and the candidate? How do people recognize that it's something they need to work on and identify what the issues are?
I'll give my own experience to help frame this, because I started interviewing. It was my first week at the startup. And I remember the CEO, who was Will Harvey, came in to my cube and he's like, hey, we've got a candidate coming in. I'd like you to interview them. And I said, great, no problem. He said, it's 2:30. I said, perfect. And he left. And I was sitting at my desk, and then I was sitting there and I was like, what do I ask him? So I got up, I walked over to his desk and I said, I don't know, what do I ask him? What do I ask the candidate? Like, this is how clueless I was. And Will said, oh, I'll send you some questions I use. Yeah. And I said, okay, great. I went back to my desk, he sent me an email, I opened it up, I looked at the questions, I said, I know the answer to that one. I'll ask that one. Yeah. So this is how I started my interviewing career, right? And I think I interviewed about 50 people at the startup before I realized I was phenomenally bad at it. I was awful. and I feel bad for the people that I interviewed early on. I knew one thing. I knew I wanted to find and hire me. That's it. That's all I was looking for. And we found and hired some good people. I made mistakes in terms of hiring some people who did not work out. And I probably passed on candidates that may have been successful at the startup or might not have, but I think I was not a good interviewer. And I think once you come to the realization that you suck at something and you decide like, actually, this is something I want to become good at, that's the point in time in which you can actually start to improve. So how do you improve, right? At the end of the day, you improve by doing something a lot, getting a lot of feedback, and being really intentional about trying to improve the skill. And intentional doesn't mean like just you do more interviews. It means that you can read about interviewing, you can do mock interviewing with your friends, your coworkers. You can have them sit in on your interviews to observe you and then give you feedback after the interview. And that last one is something I did throughout my entire career of like interviewing, right? In fact, at Amazon, it was very rare for me to be in an interview room alone. Like I would most commonly be there and being observed, sometimes by someone who had a tremendous amount of interview experience. Sometimes they were early on and they were learning about the interview experience. But even those people who hadn't had a lot of experience, afterwards we would debrief and we'd spend almost as much time talking about the interview, the questions that were asked, what the candidate did that was really great, what the candidate might have missed, that sort of thing. Even people who had no interview experience at all, they could pick up on things that I did not necessarily see. Like maybe the candidate was thinking this, and this is why they went along that path, and then they got stuck, right? And so even sort of like helping guide new interviewers, I felt like I learned a lot at the same time. So that's how people get better at it. You can also get better by you write feedback on your interview, right? And your feedback ends up being like, and it doesn't have to be a super formalized like document, but at the end of the day, it is your thesis on like we should or should not hire this person, all the things that you saw and the answers that the candidate gave, and then your assessment on those answers relative to like, what job are we going to hire this person for, and what are the criteria and what are the qualifications. And in reading this, it is easy to see people who need more help in performing the interview. And so dedicating real time to like touching base with those people, to going and sitting down with them, to talk to them about the questions that they asked and their expectations on the answers and their interpretation of the data, that will help them grow. So you don't necessarily need other people there, but it is probably the best mechanism.
Gotcha.